Hello, it's Tessa back with you for another episode of Newscast, and this one focuses on domestic abuse on the Isle of Man, and more specifically how 1 year on, whether new laws are having the desired impact. On the 4th of January last year, the Domestic Abuse Act of 2020 was introduced. It meant for the first time in history the island has specific laws to target people committing abuse or violence in a domestic setting. I caught up with the Justice and Home Affairs Minister, Jane Poole-Wilson, to find out more.
So far under the legislation, we've had 11 individuals convicted and sentenced for domestic abuse or related offences. There are currently 7 defendants awaiting trial. There are 2 defendants who have been convicted and are awaiting sentence, and one of those has been convicted for the coercive and controlling offence. And we have 2 individuals who remain under investigation.
The legislation is in place. It's clearly working. People are going through the system. They are being convicted. Can I ask you, did it surprise you that the first person prosecuted for the domestic abuse offence was a woman?
No. And the reason for that is I know it is very commonly, and I think statistically true, that the offence of domestic abuse is more often perpetrated by a man against a woman. But I have been really interested in this area, and certainly while we were looking at the legislation and the training around what the training that was needed before it came into effect, we were very aware that there is a real danger in just thinking that there is only one way in which domestic abuse can manifest. I think it's very, very important as well, and services need to be actively aware that domestic abuse can take place from a child against an adult. It can take place between 2 young people. It can take place in same-sex relationships. So I think being alive to the fact that there isn't a single way in which this type of offence can manifest is very, very important.
In terms of feedback, have you received any feedback from, say, the police, the Attorney General's chambers? Is there anything that they think maybe needs tweaking? What has the feedback been like?
So the feedback to date has been really positive, actually, from the constituent agencies involved, and I think third sector partners like Victim Support. And we know, as we've said, because of the figures we've seen with the notices and the orders and the actual offences that have been prosecuted, that it is proving its worth in terms of trying to protect people and address offending behaviour. We have done a review internally to look at, well, where do we go from here? We've got some really good foundations. And I think we recognise that we do need to build on this. So we do need to try and embed some of our processes and formalise and develop them more to help both victims, but also to try and develop out some of our perpetrator offender work. I think one of the things I would reflect on is that halfway through 2023, we also put in place the multi-agency safeguarding hub, which was an initiative that was coming together in any event. But that has been an operational change that has really helped the different agencies. And I'm talking about police usually, but it will also be social care officers, people from the health services, can be education, can be probation. So it will be different people from different agencies who can come together and work jointly. And that sort of thing is what we now need to develop out and build on more.
And I guess it is encouraging that professional curiosity, that people look beyond, say, a single incident or a single report of something and take that sort of, and have the ability to take that deep dive into a situation and have a look at all sorts of aspects.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that was part of the training and awareness that happened before the legislation came into effect. But I think it's a continuous process of raising awareness, because I think the nature of domestic abuse is such that you do have to have that professional curiosity. There does need to be an understanding that it can be about patterns of behaviour as opposed to single incidents. And I think all agencies and individuals who work in different settings, who may themselves be the first line of seeing that somebody might be a victim of domestic abuse, need to be sensitised to this.
And are all parts of the Domestic Abuse Act in force yet, or is there any part of this legislation which is still outstanding and we're waiting for to come in?
So there are a couple of pieces we didn't bring in because further work was required. So one of them is the provisions around cross-examination in situations where an individual who is not represented in a court case might end up cross-examining someone who is their victim. And the reason that hasn't been brought into effect is because there is some further work to do involving Treasury and legal aid. Generally, in court cases, if an individual isn't represented, they are entitled to conduct their own cross-examination, but it is very, very important that we don't perpetuate or re-traumatise a victim in those circumstances. Now, we haven't actually had it come up as an actual situation so far, but we are very aware that it is a piece of work we're still developing out so that we can bring that in. And the other, I think, main section that we didn't bring in is around electronic tagging for people on orders. So again, that is to do with the practicalities of actually enabling the tagging to happen, and that work is ongoing as well.
The Department of Home Affairs says with the implementation of this legislation, its aim was to reduce the number of victims impacted by domestic abuse on the Isle of Man. How do you measure against that aim? How can you actually be sure that you're making progress? Do we have sort of the statistics from 5 years ago compared to the first year? How are you going to measure against that?
It is a challenge, actually, because as we said earlier on, we didn't have this law in at all before. So what we can now do is capture statistics based on not only the issuing of domestic abuse protection notices and orders, but actually the specific offences around domestic abuse. So we are tracking those. I mean, ultimately, you would like to see the numbers of those going down. But I suspect in the short term we will see them go up because this new legislation is there and we can use it. And actually that's absolutely the right and appropriate thing to do to protect people. So in the short to medium term, I would expect that we are using this to deliver the protection we want to deliver. I think the other thing is that we are more broadly monitoring, or an area that we're asking the police to monitor is trying to reduce violence against women and girls. So we are trying to monitor those types of statistics around those crimes as well. And then the other piece that we're trying to monitor too on the perpetrator side is as we bring in interventions, and probation have introduced an intervention last year, the life minus violence intervention. So the other thing we want to monitor is how many people we can roll out those interventions to. And again, what's the impact? Are we actually changing offender behaviour and seeing a change in the reduction in perpetrators? Because
I think that's probably an important aspect of this. It's not only about the victim. I think there has to be some thought about the perpetrator too, and what interventions can be put into place to stop them becoming a repeat offender, because we do see some people go through court who have done this more than once. And is it a focus of the department to look at how we rehabilitate people who do come through the system for this offending?
Yes, I think ultimately if we really want to reduce the harm involved in this type of offence, not only do we need to support the victim to be able to get out of relationships and develop their own future in a safe way, we need to help and intervene with perpetrators to try and stop them reoffending. And there are interventions, as I say, that probation have started to roll out. I think what we need to do is also see how effective we are and you know, in an ideal world, actually stop people reoffending.
And let's just talk about awareness if we can, twofold. Firstly, do you think there is enough public awareness about the Domestic Abuse Act and the new legislation in terms of, effectively, if you fall into this category, the law is there now and you will be penalised accordingly?
I think it's never it never does any harm to continue to raise awareness that this legislation exists. I think not only from a perpetrator perspective, but also to reassure victims that, we do have these protections in law now. We do have training for staff and services. We do want to help. So, I think it's really, really important that we keep reminding people this law is there, and we want to protect and support people, and we want to intervene with perpetrators.
Manx Radio obviously spends a lot of time in court reporting on cases like this. What we have seen is lots of young people actually come through the system who've been charged with domestic abuse. Do you think enough is being done on the island to educate our young people in terms of telling them from the off that behaviour like this is wrong? Is there an education piece that's almost missing, do you think, from perhaps schools on the island?
Well, I think it's a really, really interesting point, and I think we do, as a society, need to do more to help people understand what a healthy relationship looks like and also what is problematic. And I think, we've talked about domestic abuse. Actually, domestic abuse can happen in so many ways. People, I think, can sometimes conflate it with violence, and certainly violence can be a part of it. But there is psychological abuse, there is emotional abuse, there is financial abuse and coercive and controlling abuse, all sorts of patterns to try and control someone and diminish their self-worth. And that can happen in many, many different ways. So I agree. I think it's really, really important that as a society, we focus on educating not just our young people, but all of us on what a healthy relationship looks like and the sort of behaviour that absolutely isn't acceptable. And the department, again, I think because of the complexity and the whole societal nature of this type of problem, I think we all have to work together. And so the Department of Home Affairs is engaging with the Department of Education as part of our ongoing work to look at, well, how can we build more of this knowledge and understanding, particularly for our young people, to protect them, but both to avoid them becoming victims, but also to avoid people becoming perpetrators.
And we know that for some people, leaving or fleeing an abusive relationship, whether it be, as you say, a romantic relationship, whether that be a family connection, it can be incredibly difficult. Obviously, we are still in the middle of a cost of living crisis. That does not seem to be going away. What consideration has your department given to supporting a flea fund? That's what I think the UK has termed it. The Home Office there has implemented this, and it's a way of financially supporting people who want to leave their abusers. Is there any plans for anything similar on the island?
So we are talking, Home Affairs is talking to the Treasury and officers in Social Security about how we may be able to put something similar in place in the Isle of Man, because I think what is complicated is, everybody has been living through the impact of inflation, but if we layer over the top of that the particular problems that come from domestic abuse, coercive controlling behaviour, financial abuse, people can be in a really difficult position if they want to try and get out of their high risk and damaging relationship. So I think, one, encouraging people to get some help from services is important, but two, making sure that we can build out the appropriate services and support for them, which might include access to housing, but also, yes, some immediate support financially so that they are in a position to leave that dangerous and high-risk domestic abuse relationship is important. So we are working on that, and we hope we'll be able to put something in place in the reasonably near future.
And I guess that must be, it's obviously so well intentioned, but that must be a difficult consideration, because we know your budget particularly is very tight. We know that there is a housing crisis as well, and there is a lack of accommodation for everybody on the island. So that must add additional challenges to that well-intentioned proposal, effectively, to try and help people. There's a lot of competing factors that would impact that, I'm guessing.
I think yes, government is very mindful of the financial position and making sure that we absolutely use money widely. But I think when it comes to frontline services, to protecting people, this is serious harm we're talking about. And the damage goes on and on and on. So actually, if we can intervene appropriately and provide the appropriate support to help victims, to help any children that may be involved, as well as to intervene with perpetrators, then it is the right thing to do. I think what's important is to build the appropriate framework around it. And there's lots of active work going on. For example, there is a homelessness working group that is looking at all aspects of emergency housing and crisis situations that people may find themselves in. Home Affairs has somebody engaged in that work precisely in order to make sure that we consider the victims of domestic abuse in that context as well.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Little Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.